And welcome to another episode of African News Review. And I am your host as usual, Adesoji Iginla, and with me is the good comrade, journalist, broadcaster, Black Star News, comrade Milton Allimadi. How are you, sir?
Asante sana, karibu.
Yes.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Yes. You were on the Majority Report doing the good work of giving the world a snippet of what the African reality of an experience is. Other than that, what has been the highlight of the week in terms of news where you are?
Well, first of all, I want to say they were doing sort of a tribute or Majority Report on behalf of Michael Brooks, So they had people that used to interact with him, people that used to be on his show, the Michael Brooks show, to give a recap. And what were the type of programs that he liked discussing.
Yeah.
And, Michael was, just very fond of the history of Thomas Sankara. And so that's why they had me on.
Okay.
And so may Michael continue to rest in peace with the ancestors.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, in terms of the other news, of course, is Trump taking over, supposedly, control of D.C. It's largely theatrics, of course.
Okay.
And it's one of these other diversions he's looking for. Involve the kind of issues that the right-wing MAGA supporters like. Oh, he's going tough, on a black-operated entity where they're not tough enough on crime. So let the Superman come in and intervene. Anything to divert from the Epstein files. So that's what's going on. And he wanted the Attorney General to appoint somebody who would oversee the police department, would be above the Commissioner of Police. And I think, and as people know, DC has a special status,
Yeah.
It's not really a state. It's been agitating for statehood all these years. So the District of Columbia challenged that successfully in the court. So they will get to keep the same police commissioner that they have. Nevertheless, he has deployed National Guard troops.
Okay.
Yes, deployed National Guard soldiers on the streets. And then, of course, the second major news was Trump traveling to Alaska to meet with Putin.
Okay.
And well, if things go the way the two of them are pushing, they might end this war soon. I think what Trump, and this is something that he's not hidden in the past, when he met with Zelensky earlier this year, and that broke down into a shouting match, essentially was telling Zelensky, listen, you cannot turn the tide militarily, right? So what you need to do is just agree to a ceasefire and peace deal and let the guy keep the territory that they've seized so far. So we're back to that same spot again. By saying that he's no longer pushing for a ceasefire, it means he's listening to Putin's argument, which is that we need to address the root cause of this issue, which, by the way, I support. There's no way can you have a stable Europe if NATO extends its borders to Ukraine. So even though major publications like the New York Times and its editorial board would prefer to play dumb and to think that's not a major issue of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO, and that Russia will just not accept that and would rather continue the war. It's a war of aggression, technically, but there are issues that cannot be ignored. So the New York Times is only treating the aspect that this is a war of aggression. Country A invaded country B. That is true. But we have to look at all the issues involved, and you're not going to wish away the NATO issue. It won't happen, you see? So it seems that Trump has come to that conclusion, that at least while he's president, the issue of Ukraine and NATO, that's a non-starter. It's not even going to be on the table. And the second issue is Ukraine is going to accept the fact that it's not going to get, at least not now, the land that Russia currently controls. I think the stumbling block is Russia wants to seize more territory before they sign a final peace deal. And that, I think, even Trump would find that difficult to sell. So I think that's why they did not conclude something on Friday when they met. Had the issue of Russia wanting to seize more land not been on the table, I think they would have agreed in the absence of Ukraine, because Europe cannot sustain Ukraine's defenses without the United States.
Okay, so over here, the fallout has been last week's protest, where the proscription of a group known as the Palestine Action have been making the rounds. People who are conversant with the news over here would have learnt that in the course of last weekend, last Saturday, about 534 people were arrested. Now, the fallout of that...
The same protest by the elderly? Okay.
By the elderly. So the fallout of that now is they've slated another protest for the first Saturday in September. They're seeking 1,000 people to come out and be arrested. Meanwhile, the law that prescribed that organization is going through a judicial review, because what happens here is once it's challenged, it will undergo that as a matter of fact. But while that is still going through that process, the people are on the street testing the veracity of that law. And so the police are having to appeal to people to, almost please don't get arrested, because it's not a good look. It's not a good look, arresting the elderly. But the fact that the elderly have come out and done that meant that protest has taken up a life of its own now. So you not have just only the young people out there during the long protests in the course of the weekends. You now have the elderly getting arrested, coming out and basically saying, you know what, you're going to have to arrest me. So
we need to have some of that here.
Well, if you do, I'm sure, probably
we need to have the elderly. Let's see if they come and kick and beat and drag the elderly. We need to see some of those scenes.
Yeah, probably. Maybe, that will move, So speaking of that, we're talking about the idea that something that was started during the colonial era of the British mandate in Palestine. The fallout is what we're now dealing with in 2025. And harking back to colonial times, but this time across the channel, I'm talking about specifically the France. The first story for today comes from the German news outlet Deutsche Welle, and it's that Mr. Macron has weighed in and said he has acknowledged French colonial repression in Cameroon. And the lead reads, French President Emmanuel Macron has acknowledged the violence committed by France, by French troops in Cameroon, as Cameroon fought for its independence. It comes as African leaders reassess France's ongoing presence on the continent. And it goes a bit further. It says French Emmanuel Macron has admitted the country's used repressive violence in Cameroon during the 1950s as the West African nation fought for its independence. In a letter sent to Cameroon counterpart Paul Biya last month, Macron acknowledged the actions of the French colonial troops. This comes following an official report commissioned by France in 2022, which found that France used mass force displacement, pushed scores of Cameroon into internment camps, and supported militias known for their brutality, with the purpose of battling the country's aspiration for independence. Initially, in light of what is going on in Gaza, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's
Because you can see
very
parallels.
disingenuous. It's a
Yeah.
very disingenuous story. I mean, why are you talking about the past when France is still committing atrocities in Cameroon today?
Oh,
And the article, you know, they can't be that ignorant. They must know something is going on in Cameroon,
true.
right?
Yeah.
There's a fratricidal war that pits the side that is English speaking versus the side that is French speaking.
Correct.
Which is fully supported by France and by French companies and by the French government.
Mm.
So why is the article failing to make that obvious connection and going with the spin of France that these issues are issues of the past? And we can debate it. It's not mentioned in the article, of course. Should we discuss compensation? Is compensation legitimate? These things happened a long time ago. Should an apology not be sufficient? All that is pure propaganda when you are witnessing people being killed as we speak right now in Cameroon. So I think it's one of the most disingenuous articles that I've ever seen. Of course, France needs to acknowledge those crimes, needs to apologize for those crimes, needs to compensate for those crimes. They killed specific leaders. They committed massacres in specific, all of it documented. So it can actually be quantified. Like if you go to a court of law and you go to civil after there's a criminal trial and you're found liable for the deaths of people, I mean, you're responsible. And you can be assessed, you know, monetary assessment against you. So why should that not be the case with France right now? The lives of those people are less valuable to the French. You know, the lives must be valuable to somebody, otherwise you would not be talking about it today. You would not be acknowledging it, right?
Yes.
You would just keep quiet forever. The fact that you're acknowledging it means you know that it is an issue that is important to the people of Cameroon, particularly to the families of the victims and their relatives, you know? So that's my initial reaction to that.
Okay, so one question would be, does the acknowledgement without reparation, which you alluded to here, serve Africa's purpose or merely preserves the French image whilst its neo-colonial grip via the CFA franc military presence, which is gradually grinding to a halt, or resource control remains?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what to add to to what I just said, to be honest with you. I mean, without compensation, it's meaningless. It's just public relations. It's similar to a few weeks ago when they acknowledged the massacre in that camp in Senegal of ex-servicemen who had protested because they were paid, first of all, differential. Europeans, soldiers were paid at a higher differential. Not only were they paid at a very low differential, they'd gone for months without being paid. At that camp. It's the subject of a film. Camp Tiare, I think it's called. Right.
Tiare massacre. Yeah.
Exactly. So all of this is meaningless when it is not accompanied by monetary compensation. You, after all, first of all, you compensated the former enslavers in Haiti.
Yeah.
When they were defeated after the Haitian Revolution. And then you force Haiti to compensate you for more than a century, paying compensation to you for daring to free Africans from enslavement in Haiti.
Yep.
So you know about the importance of compensation. So don't go around the world talking about, oh, we acknowledge it, you know, it cannot be put behind us in history. No. The manifestations we witness on a daily basis today, you know.
Okay. So that said, one thing also jumped out to me there, which is you are apologizing for your role in the assassination of leaders who were supposed to lead Cameroon back in the day. But yet you write in the letter to a president that has refused to leave office and in fact is thinking of running again for another presidential term. How does that add up to your genuine sincerity, knowing fully well this guy is just a feature of neocolonial rule in Cameroon?
That just confirms what I just said, that this is a pure propaganda on the part of France, you know, to elevate, you know, this kleptocrat dictator. Unless you're saying Macron is also a kleptocrat dictator. Said he wrote to his counterpart. Think about that.
Yeah.
Trying to legitimize Paul Biya. You know, it's outrageous. And it's sad that a lot of people don't probably read it the way we are reading it and analyzing it. You see? How is Paul Biya your counterpart? In what sense? This is a guy who rigs elections. Rigs elections, doesn't run the country. The country is run by French interests and French companies.
Yeah.
The guy lives in a Swiss hotel suite, you know. A couple of months ago, his own countrymen were asking whether he's alive or not, after having not been seen for weeks, right?
Yep.
And you elevate him by giving the impression that he's actually doing something.
Something, yeah.
By saying, wrote to his counterpart. And then also notice, and you know, it just shows you how either ignorant or, and I hope it's, let me give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's total ignorance, right?
Okay.
How can you mention the names of the people assassinated, the leaders, without mentioning Felix Mumi?
I noticed that.
It's like talking about the Congolese independence leaders who were killed by the Belgians and not mention Patrice Lumumba.
Yeah.
How perverted, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
Because, I mean, I scanned the article for his name, and when I didn't see it, it was...
Yeah, it would be like mentioning Polo and all those other guys,
and not mentioning
comrades who were killed by the firing squad, and not mentioning Patrice Lumumba. That's what it would be like. Yeah.
Anyway, you know, before we go on to the next story, for those who want a more fuller understanding of what we've just discussed, there is a new book out titled The Cameroon War, A History of French Neocolonialism in Africa. It's from the Vessel Press.
And that should be a good one.
It's, oh my God, it is.
That should be a good one.
It is a very interesting read, actually. I mean, I'm on chapter 4 at the moment, but so far it's been a page turner. So the title of the book again is The Cameroon War, A History of French Neocolonialism in Africa. It makes a very good read. And to add to that, to just understand the topography with regards to French neocolonialism in West Africa or in Africa at large, you could add to that Africa's last colonial currency, the CFA. And it's by, again, this is Pluto Press, so African last colonial currency. So that said, we move on to the next story, which comes from the Associated Press. and it's titled, I mean, this is very startling, by the way. It says, Israel is in talks with possibly resettle Palestinians from Gaza in South Sudan. The report is filed from Tel Aviv, and it reads, Israel is in discussion with South Sudan about the possibility of resettling Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to war-torn East African country, part of a wider effort by Israel to facilitate mass migration from the territory left in ruins by its 22-month offensive against Hamas. 6 people familiar with the matter confirmed the talks to Associated Press. It is unclear how far the talks have advanced, but if implemented, the plans would amount to transferring people from one war-ravaged land at risk of famine to another and raise human rights concern. One last part. The Prime Minister said he wants to realize US President Donald Trump's vision of relocating much of Gaza's population through what Netanyahu refers to as voluntary migration. Israel has floated similar resettlement proposal with other African nations. I think it's the right, I don't even want to go there. So, I mean, what is there to be said?
Well, you see, that's the danger, right, of having an African country that is normally independent, but it's not functional. You know, it does not exercise sovereignty and it's not functional. And I suppose these are some of the things that Nkrumah was warning about in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. The dangers of having these balkanized, tiny countries that individually amount to nothing but problems, but only collectively could become the solution. And I mean, obviously, anybody who reads this story understands that this can only happen in a weak African country, right? And they know that global readers have a certain perception of Africa, right? And Africans. And the dysfunctional state, weak, desperate for money, and willing to do anything for money. Accept toxic waste, accept
used clothes,
people that are being forced away from their national homeland, right? And essentially collaborate in this genocidal campaign against the Palestinians. That's what you're doing. So whether you're accepting the live ones, the fact that they're being ejected as a consequence of this genocidal campaign, it means you are aiding and abetting in genocide, whether you like to see it that way or not. That's what it is, right? And it's so, you know, it's very pathetic in a very sick way that there are people who are the victims of an extermination campaign by the Nazis, right?
Correct.
Who are forced out of many European countries by the Nazis, right? Are now executing the same kind of policy against another marginalized people. You know, but what I might say is this, and this is a problem that it can happen. I like many years ago when the United States was trying to find, and we discussed this in the past, a permanent home for Africa on continental Africa. You know, right now it's located in Germany because
Stuttgart, Germany.
No African country would accept on its soil. They may have US bases, but not a permanent African base. And Liberia was entertaining a US request. And Nigeria powerful country in the region said there will be consequences. It's not going to happen. And it never happened, you see? So we need that kind of attitude. But look at the neighboring countries. Uganda, under corrupt kleptocrat Museveni, and I saw his, imbecile son supposedly tweeted something saying Uganda, if Mzee, referring to his father, accepts it, Uganda might be willing to accept ejected Palestinians as well. So you see, so that's the attitude you have.
So hold that.
And look at Kenya. Kenya, Ruto loves money.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So you don't have, Nigeria, with all its many faults, occasionally has intervened in major events in Africa's history.
True.
With all its faults, all the multiple regimes, Nigeria was consistent, for example, when Africa was fighting against apartheid. It didn't matter which government was in place in Nigeria, whether it was General whom, all of them were on the same page when it came to supporting that cause. I'm sure every politician was on the same page when Liberia was talking about accepting Africa.
Yep.
Unacceptable, right?
Yep.
So we need to have that kind of attitude to let South Sudan know that this will not be tolerated. But sadly, we don't have a principled government like that right now.
Okay, so, you raised the issue of sovereignty. There is obviously cases of this having happened in the past on the continent. And by that, I mean, you had before colonialism set in, 1652 with the Boers in the Afrikaans. You had the coming of the Indians who were brought in by the British into Kenya and Tanzania. And obviously the returning soldiers from the First World War who then displaced people in Kenya. So I'm essentially talking about settler colonialism. Now, here's the problem. This continent alone has experienced that in multiple ways. You're talking Zimbabwe, Zambia, to a larger extent, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, even Namibia, bore the brunt of the extreme nature of it. In 2025, you are thinking of displacing. Africa, by its very nature, is a very accommodating place. But what you're doing is you've committed a crime somewhere, and the victims of said crime is what you're now moving onto the African continent. I don't want to use the word of dumping, but essentially what you're doing is you're dumping the colonial project's problems on Africa with its colonial history. The idea that certain populations mix alone has been combustible in the past. You look no further than the Rwanda massacre, genocide, the war in, the war in Congo, the ongoing war in Congo, the war as we speak in Sudan. And yet, we're still mulling the idea of moving some displaced people. Why would you want to move them when the idea of a shared space can engage for people who seek to want to stay there? So my question to you would be, what would be the moral and legal implication for Sudan if he were to accept Palestinians under such an arrangement?
No, first of all, the government in South Sudan does not deserve to be in place, and they would not deserve to be in place even more. And this is just a confirmation of why they don't deserve to be in place. First of all, the government is illegitimate. Under Salva Kiir has been there since 2013 with no elections. They haven't had any elections at all. Even the last peace treaty, which is now unraveling because he's arrested his vice president, Riek Machar, had called for elections. So anytime it gets closer to the period of election, he manufactures this crisis, right? And obviously, this is the kind of country that Israel wants to deal with, where there would be no accountability. And, you know, who cares? These are Palestinians anyway. They're not expelling Europeans. So, you know, let them be treated the way Salva Kiir is treating other Africans in South Sudan. But the bigger question is this. They have experience with this kind of displacement.
Yeah, from their own war with the Sudan.
They have the experience. How did they end up with all of what is now Israel? By kicking out the Palestinians, the Arabs. So they're doing, it's an extension, continuation of what happened with the original displacement, the original Nakba against the Palestinian people. This is phase 2, so that they can then seize the entire region, actually, which is their grand vision. And, you know, sadly, and the biggest, you know, forget South Sudan. You know, they have their own problems, but this is not their problem. This bigger problem is countries like Egypt. They're standing there and watching this massacre. I think if South Africa was in the region and it had the current structure, they would not just stand by and allow Palestinians to be massacred like this without intervening and saying they need to find a way to defend themselves, because the people that are being killed obviously are not Hamas. These children are not Hamas. The tens of thousands of children killed are not Hamas. So you can't keep using that Hamas excuse to exterminate a people. The ones who are not Hamas deserve to be able to defend themselves. And they're not able to, because none of those countries are willing to help them defend themselves.
There is so there is a stock of the arrangement that it's considered loose talk and no such thing is happening. But here is where I push back against that. The moment you put something on the press, you're testing the waters to see what the people's reception of such story would be. If the reception is lukewarm, then you might as well just go ahead with it, you know, in phases. But the fact that there's been a large uproar about the idea that such a thing should not even cross anybody's radar, not talk of even putting said idiocy into action, then one must ask the question, when would it stop? When would it stop? Because we're talking 22 months now. The pictures
will stop after they kill all of them. They're starving them to death right now. If this continues, then they would have found their own version of the final solution against the Palestinians. They're starving them to death. If nothing happens, if there's no intervention, eventually all of them would die of hunger. You know, so the issue of relocating them would become a moot issue. You see. So that issue is another, you know, it's just another disguise. Talk about it while you continue exterminating them by starvation. You know, remarkable that we're living and watching it.
Exactly, in living color as well, live streamed. What would you say the press role, the media's role has been in this debacle?
Well, you have to distinguish which media you're referring to.
Okay, so
the apologists, the same people who led us to Libya, of course, are pretending that there's no genocide ongoing in against the Palestinian people. They will bring lawyers to debate whether the killings fit technically the term, genocide. Those are the kind of stories you're getting in the New York Times, it's very chilling because you realize that, yes, they're human beings, and then they're human beings in quotations, correct? And that's the issue that I deal with in my book, right? That the otherization of Africans in order to justify crimes against them. That was the whole objective of the book, to understand the meaning of depicting Africans as lesser human beings. Didn't just wake up one day and Europeans say, oh, let's start writing books that show how beastly Africans are. Let's do magazine articles, show how beastly Africans are. Let's write books about how beastly Africans are. Yes, they did that, but to what purpose? To condition the mind that these are beasts, so therefore they don't deserve that land anyway. They don't deserve the gold, the diamond, the uranium, the coltan, the copper, the cobalt, the rubber, the timber. You see, the mind has been conditioned over centuries. And the mind is conditioned right now to see the Palestinians as other forms of Africans, you see? In fact, right now, the way they're being treated, and, it's obvious that it would be difficult today to treat Africans that way because Africans have a larger constituency. All those other African countries, even with all the problems they have, all those useless governments, they would come together if Africans were being treated like that, which is the irony about it. When others treat Africans in a certain way, they find it unacceptable, and they'll go out of their way to challenge and counter that. African countries that were committing massacres against their own citizens were contributing to fight against apartheid South Africa because they can't accept that Europeans should be abusing Africa. No way. They would go to any extent to resist that. You see?
Yeah.
So if non-Africans, Europeans, were doing the same thing right now to Africans, the way the Israelis are doing and their European supporters are doing against the Palestinians, they would intervene. They would. They would find ways to intervene. But right now, Egypt, Jordan,
Saudi Arabia,
Syria, Iraq, all those countries have been decimated. And then you have Iran also. It's in fact, it's the irony, Iran, which is not an Arab country, right?
Yeah,
they're Persians.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have exerted the most attempt to intervene.
Yes.
On behalf of the Palestinians. How ironic, right?
Yeah.
And then you have South Africa all the way in Southern Africa, also intervening with the court actions, and the strong statements and the denunciations, So that is why, unfortunately, the Palestinians are in a major predicament. I mean, obviously it helped the protests by conscious people in other European countries, in Britain, here in the United States. That has helped. I think otherwise by now, they would have been totally exterminated. And they're still being exterminated. But I think, obviously, two things. You're going to see many countries recognize a Palestinian state in September, in the General Assembly. And then number two, I think it's going to have long-term consequences vis-a-vis US-Israel policy. because the younger voters in the United States cannot accept that the status quo is acceptable. So this blanket support, I think, is going to be very difficult to keep it going in the United States.
When I mentioned the media, you rightly pointed out the role the likes of the New York Times has played. I mean, a cursory look at the headlines just tells you that it's almost as if you have two equal combatants on rather than someone resisting occupation.
Right. And they know it too. And that's a sad thing.
Yeah.
They know it and do it because they know that, the other side has a stronger constituency. Correct?
Correct.
While the Palestinian Africans, and let me call them that way, because that's how many Europeans see them, whether the Palestinians object to me designating them that or not, that's immaterial.
In solidarity,
but for purposes of analysis, they're Africans in the minds of many Europeans. And that is why the suffering and extermination is being seen as something which is acceptable.
You mentioned the culturing of the mind, the curating of the mind, so that whatever it is that's done to them is eventually acceptable. The late Colombian professor Edward Said, in his book Orientalism, goes in depth into explaining how the European mind has been trained to see Arabs as savages and what have you. So when you bring them into the African fold, it speaks to what their minds have been phrased to. What's his name? Winston Churchill would describe Arabs as beastly people. I mean, we could go down the list of the European greats and how they describe the Arabs. So thinking that after what the pogrom that happened in Europe in the 1930s, you would expect that people who welcomed you into Palestine will be accorded respect. Instead, what they've been gifted has been ethnic cleansing, which is shocking to the core, because away from all the, away from all the standard talking points and what have you, the real history of the place, if you read it, it is shocking. The injustice alone is it's it's incendiary, if for want of a better word. So a final thought from you on this is,
well, first of all, it's not shocking at all. It is history, what we've seen in history. But before I address that, on the issue of Edward Said, before my book was published by Kendall Hunt as Manufacturing Hate, much, much earlier, I had a self-published version called Our Hearts of Darkness, How White Writers Created the Racist Image of Africa. And I remember I sent an autographed copy to Professor Edward Said. I think about that time he was already getting, very sick. So we never got to meet. And then a couple of years later, I'm doing research at, because Columbia has a Edward Said collection at the main library, Low Library at Columbia. So I was in the Said room, going through all those books. And then I was just randomly going through the stacks of books. And lo and behold, I found a copy of the book that I had autographed and sent to him. It's in the Said collection at Columbia University. I said, wow, I never got to meet him after I sent him the book in person. But here it is, a part of his legacy now. Now, in terms of the shocking, it's consistent with what they've done. It's consistent with Europeans coming to the United States, being welcome, and then the people that welcome them getting exterminated. It is consistent with Europeans going to Kenya, being welcome, taking over the so-called White Highlands, going to Namibia, being welcome, exterminating the Herero and the Nama people. And up to date, their descendants still own almost 80% of the land in Namibia. Same thing in South Africa. Coming there, or we are on our way to India. We need a landing post so we can rest. So they can rest, correct? As in the 17th century. Correct. They're still resting today by owning 72% of the land in South Africa. So unless we make these historical connections, we will not be able to help victims resolve these issues. And that is why South Africa in particular understood what the Palestinians are undergoing. And they became very vigorous in their denunciation of what Israel has been doing, because they identify having gone through that same experience of dispossession, displacement, and marginalization, you see?
Yeah, we could go on and on, but for those who want to do some more digging on their own, you could start with the classic, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Professor Ilan Pape. On the media question, you could read Howard Frowles and Richard Fox, Israel and Palestine on Record, How the New York Times Frames the Middle East. There is one I am currently reading, and it's a very poignant, it's got a very poignant title. And the title is One Day When It Is Safe, When There Is No Personal Downside to Calling a Thing What It Is, When It Is Too Late to Hold Anyone Accountable, Everyone Will Always Have Been Against It. And it's by Omar El-Khaddad. It's
very well said.
I mean, the title alone is brilliant, and the thing flows. It's not a difficult read. It puts everything in context. Media, traveling, the narrative, how the media frames it, how you switch on your TV and you're looking at people that that are being described in the most egregious way possible. When it comes to settler colonialism on the African continent, Comrade Milton mentioned the untold story of the British Gulag in Kenya. So that's the British giving you their form of the concentration camp in Kenya. The British would also go to the Indian Ocean, the Chaguan Islands, where they gave away the island to the US military. And it's in this book by Philip Sands, is titled The Last Colony, Philip Sands. So all of this stuff, like the good comrade said, is available to understand once you connect the dots that this is part of a larger problem rather than an isolated case. So
yeah, and for them, it's not a problem even. For them, it's part of the agenda. You see?
Yeah. It's
the agenda.
It's never been one where they have decided, you know what, we are not where. The problem for them is getting caught. Is once they get caught, they will then trump out the usual stories like, oh, we look at this with concern, with deep regrets, and their usual platitudes that is supposed to soothe you for while they continue what it is they're doing. And hopefully...
Right. And people need to understand more about the economics behind it. You see?
Yes. So,
I mean, that region is it's like Africa, really. Even even Saudi Arabia, they may have the petroleum wealth, but they're powerless because they import everything.
Mm.
You see?
Yep.
So they will never be allowed to industrialize as well.
True. True.
Never. So in that sense, they're like producing cocoa and coffee and tea. You know, definitely they earn a lot more revenue because of oil.
Yeah.
Bouncing between $75 to $100+ a barrel, right? Depending on the circumstances. But where does the money end up? Back to the Western institutions, in the financial establishment, or by importing physical goods, importing intellectual goods, importing construction companies, engineering companies, you see? Yeah, they will never be like independent, like a German autonomously independent economy, you know, or United States, you know, or Japan, you see, or China, you see.
And there's also the part where I believe you shared a clip with me in the course of the week by Dr. David Hicko, the author of The Divide, where he talked about how Israel itself is used as a beachhead for the Western's imperialism about making sure that the Arabs do not control their resources. So we should also see not just as settler colonialism, but also as a way, as a neo-colonial project in itself, that it's important to understand that the position that Israel plays there is one of a destabilizing force. I mean, it's basically gone to war with everybody, every of its neighbor, and now they're signing what it's known as the Abraham Accords of peace. But, you know, like to quote the word of the great Palestinian writer Hassan Kafani, who said, when you talk peace with Israel, you're effectively talking surrender. So,
yeah.
Yes, I mean, we continue to watch this situation. And so we go on to the next story, which is from The Guardian. And it's titled, as a pretty straightforward one, it's titled Asian Manuscripts Return to Timbuktu 13 years after jihadists take over. It says Malian city welcomes hundreds of crates of treasures after more than a decade stored in the capital, Bamako. And the lead reads, political and religious figures in Malian cities of Timbuktu have welcomed the return of ancient manuscripts that were removed to the capital. This is following the attack by the jihadists. Jihadists destroyed more than 4,000 manuscripts, as many as 9 mausoleums, after occupying the desert city in 2012. Workers at the state-run Ahmed Baba Institute used rice sacks to smuggle remaining documents out of the city a number of ways, including by donkeys and motorcycle. So how do we forestall such things happening, considering the fact that we have the role of technology, or like you rightly contributed the other time about finding a centerpiece in Addis Ababa, which is where the AU is based, and putting all these stuffs on display there.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree with that. And as I'm listening to you talk about, you know, first of all, and of course, The Guardian, it's one of the better, it's in The Guardian, right?
Yes, it is.
And that's one of the better, you know, it's not a typical corporate outlet.
Medium.
Because their model now, I think, is reader supported. That's their model.
Yeah, that's the case.
But even The Guardian fails to mention that, because this is something that it doesn't matter. You can mention it in every story related to this issue. That this puts to rest, you know, once and for all, this history that, you know, Europeans came there to
civilize their
educate or give knowledge to Africans, you see?
Mm.
So mention it. It only takes 2 or 3 sentences, and you can include it in every article that you write about this issue. Because even though it's obvious, unless you, because Europeans are not used, not only Europeans and other non-Africans are not used to making the connection of according intelligence to Africans, historical intelligence, you see? So this is one opportunity, so we must not miss it.
Okay.
That this is intellectual production produced by Africans centuries ago. And to show you the love and passion they have just for intellectual production, how they preserved it, you see?
Yeah.
That's another story right there. That is not, it's obvious, but it's not obvious. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And then, obviously, yeah, I agree with the suggestion. This should be part of, at least part of it, even if it's not all, should be in that, you know, Museum of Africa in Addis Ababa, where you have the headquarters of the AU. See?
Mm.
And then finally, it should go on a world tour, right? You have all these ancient Egyptian
Chinese
mementos that go on world tour. They go on loan to all these global museums.
Yeah.
There's no reason why you should not do this. This is, we're talking tens of millions of dollars in revenue for Mali, for the country, and to preserve, you know, why should you have somebody who's paid every other month or so, struggling to preserve something this precious, which has so much value, that not only can generate money to preserve it, but can generate surplus to support the country. You see?
Yeah.
So if they're not thinking like that, these are ideas that we are sharing with them. Their ministry of whatever handles this, antiquities or
heritage,
culture,
the heritage ministry,
what have you. You know, get the most knowledgeable people, obviously knowledgeable people who know about what these individual manuscripts contain.
Yeah.
Because you would have to write, you know, some descriptions and essays to go with the global tour. If you go on a global tour, you would have to produce brochures, you see?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
But this is something that in some free extra time, I'm willing to make some other inquiries with Malian officials.
Yeah, yeah.
And say, listen, have you contacted the Met? And, you know, this is money in the bank for you guys.
Yeah.
You know?
The Tate's gallery here. The Tate's gallery, I mean.
Absolutely.
The Louvre,
you know?
The Louvre in France.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you have it 3 months here, you're going to have tens of millions of dollars. Have it 3 months at the other museum there in Europe, tens of millions of dollars. You know? And then you take it back to Addis Ababa at this modern, museum built with the money you are generating through these global tours. You can go on tour for 2 years. That gives you enough time to build that museum because the money is coming in. You see, after 2 years, you go there. Now, people know about this because you've gone on a world tour. They'll start visiting Addis to see it in Addis Ababa or Timbuktu. If you split it, keep some in Timbuktu, keep some in Addis. 5 years later, you got another world tour, you know?
Yeah, you keep the circle. Yeah, you keep the circle moving.
Like any famous, band. They wait and then they go another tour, right?
Yeah, correct. You bring out your
so this thing has tremendous value, really, and I hope they do the right thing. There should not be lamenting and crying, oh, we have difficulty preserving this, because you're not thinking outside the box. Why are we reading about it in The Guardian? Take it on a world tour. If The Guardian thinks it's worth writing an article about, it means there are people around the world who would pay to see it. You see?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's help them make it happen with ideas if they were not already thinking of it. You know.
I mean, we're talking about it, and if the audience do like, share, and subscribe, and people get to hear it, they can hear the good comrades' suggestion of moving this incredible record of history around the world. So
I want to see it.
Of course, I will go and see it.
I want to see it. So if you brought it here on a tour, it's easier for me to go see it than to travel to Timbuktu. You see?
Yeah.
We're in the same story, by the way. I think they're talking about the infrastructure challenges and all that stuff. You know.
I mean, you get people to
think outside the box. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, and you get a double whammy. You get people to pay to see it, and people buy the brochure as well. So
absolutely, of course.
You know, with elegant pictures and what have you, big, massive, you know. Oh yeah. So that said, we come to our final story for the day, and it's from the BBC. And it reads, abducted Ugandan student jailed over anti-Museveni TikTok video. That's a Ugandan university student who mysteriously went missing 2 months ago after posting a TikTok video that harshly criticized President Yoweri Museveni's leadership has been jailed. Elsin Tumwine disappeared on 8 June, sparking accusation from opposition figures and activists that he had been abducted and illegally detained by military agents. But it reads, he's alleged to have doctored a clip of a parliamentary speaker's response to a general apology Museveni issued in May to the Baganda people, Uganda's largest ethnic group, who formed the traditional Buganda kingdom. Over the Museveni's nearly 4 decades in power, relation with the kingdom and its monarch has at times been strained. The kingdom has no political power but remains influential. Tumwine TikToks accused the 80-year-old president of not apologizing for other things during his time in power. I mean, can you imagine? You're being jailed for that.
Yeah.
Over to you, sir.
Well, it's sad that, and I'm glad that you brought up this article. I hadn't seen it. Obviously, I'm going to go later on online and excoriate the BBC totally. I think I gave them a good beating with the propaganda in Rwanda when they were trying to ignore that M23 is actually essentially part of Rwanda's regular army.
Yeah.
And I think after one straight week of beating them up, I think I started seeing that it got their attention. I'm going to do the same thing with Uganda. First of all, you're saying this guy has been there for 40 years. Why are you referring to him as a president? That's the same thing like, what was that other publication that said Macron wrote to his Cameroon counterpart, So Museveni is who's their prime minister again? Starmer.
Yeah, Keir Starmer.
Yeah. So they're counterparts, right?
Yeah.
One guy you have who is elected can be kicked out at any time by the voters. One guy who you're reading about him torturing a student who criticized him on TikTok. Think about that. And you're referring to him as President Museveni. See, that's the kind of, they might think it's subtle propaganda, but it's not. That's legitimization right there.
Yeah.
At some point, you started referring to Mobutu as dictator. Why? What is the difference between this guy and dictator Mobutu? Why is it not dictator Museveni? Right? Because dictator Museveni would send a clear signal. He's torturing a young student who just said this on TikTok, that, yeah, okay, you gave a half apology, you haven't apologized for the genocide in every part of the country. There's been massacres in the east, in the west, in central, and particularly in the northern part of Uganda, where, you know, there's a documentary there, Brilliant Genocide. Anybody just Google a brilliant genocide and go to YouTube and you'll see that documentary. But for the BBC, it's President Museveni. So you aid and abet this thing you're writing about. Now you're showing you are, you know, suddenly you are you really critical that in fact this student was tortured, made to apologize, ask for forgiveness, and then still get sentenced to what, 3 months after already being tortured, right? And you refer to him as President Museveni. You know, on many levels, we can analyze that. You know, you are apologia, you're an apologist for the regime. And it also shows the kind of your perception of Africa and Africans, right? Yeah, this is just a typical thing that happens in some other African country. It's normal. It's normal because you normalize it. You think Ugandans like that? That a young person a student at the leading university, Makerere, can be arrested and tortured just because he said, oh, by the way, you didn't apologize for so many other things that you've done, which is 100% correct. And that's normal. And that goes back to that, oh, it's in Africa after all, it's in Uganda after all, you know. You may see it that way, but we as Africans don't see it that way, and we'll always call you out on it. And some of the points are made right now. I'm going to go back on social media and make the BBC, if they don't get a chance to watch our discussion, they're going to know what I said about them, you know. But it's not surprising. They've been an apologist for Museveni for a very long time. Very long time. But if you hit them well, consistently, then they back off. So it's important to sometimes preempt them. Hit them even in advance, just like they do with us.
Correct. Yes. So yeah, that said, we've come to the end of this week's episode of African News Review. We hope I've learned so much more. Rubbing minds with the good comrade who brings his A game as usual. Hopefully he goes a little bit soft on the BBC because we only the dear old lady is the old Beeb, Auntie Beeb is she is kind of fragile, so the least we want is anybody, you know, exerting themselves when it comes to understanding how its editorial policy works.
Right. But no, we're exposing all of them. We're exposing all of them. We're not going to let them get away anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason why we have this program. It's the framing of stories about Africans should not be allowed to lie, because
absolutely not.
Africa has its flaws. We'll be the first to point them out. But at the same time, while we're doing that, we should not accept caricatures and being maligned in the interest of interests that have not meant us well. Right from
Museveni is a thief, he's a killer, he's a tyrant, he's a dictator. He's invaded neighboring countries, caused the deaths of millions of Africans. And I always excoriate him for that. But I don't say he does it because he's an African. I don't do that. I don't say this is a typical African situation. You know, that's where I have issues with institutions like the BBC for racializing, because that then makes it easy for them to cover up for regimes like that by saying, oh, this is after all an African thing. No, it's not an African thing. Nonsense. So you can hit both of them. You can hit Museveni and you can hit the BBC as well. And you'll still be correct, you see.
Yeah. I mean, like you always say, we should not allow them to manufacture consent. And this framing, the way Africans are, described often in Western media, is essentially manufacturing consent. If we paint you in the most despicable way possible, we can be allowed to get away with literally murder. So, so we'll continue to do the work, and hopefully you all join us next week. And the good comrade, any final thoughts?
A luta continua.
And from me, until next week, it's good night and God bless.